For those of you who don't know much about what we do here at Relative, we are a text analytics software platform. So our technology can take 2 or more text sources, compare them, and show you what's different. And then insights from these comparisons provide game-changing business intelligence. So just to start with, I'm going to go through today's agenda. So I'll be starting off with a piece of our own analysis using the tool, which will really just set the scene for today's session. We'll then be hearing from Gideon from McCann, and he's going to do a benchmarking masterclass for us. We've then got today's panel. So we've got Ben and Felicity, who are both here with us today, and we've got Peter, who is online. We're also going to have time for question and answers at the end, and we're just going to split this up though. So for those of you that are online, please submit your questions through the Q&A box that is on your screen. And then when the session, at the end of the Q&A online, we're just going to have a more traditional Q&A in the room. So please just raise your hand. For both of those sessions, please just let me know who your question is directed to. So today we're going to be talking about competitor analysis and benchmarking, and it would be ridiculous for me to stand up here and to tell you why that's important. It's something that you already know. But what I really want us to think about today is new and interesting ways to approach this. So we've done a really robust piece of analysis looking at 8 well-known pizza brands. So these are household names, and on paper, they appear to be quite similar. So for this, we analysed a lot of data and ran loads of comparisons. So we looked at brand messaging, which is maybe seen as the more traditional way of looking at competitor analysis. So for this, we looked at website copy and social data. However, we wanted to add an extra layer to this analysis, and therefore we've also looked at brand perception. So for this, it's what consumers are saying on social about these brands. And then for this, we've actually used a new functionality within the platform that is heat maps. So what are heat maps? Heat maps are a visualization tool that allows you to quickly and clearly see which brands are most and least different from one another. They can also be used at a pre-analysis stage to guide which further analysis you may like to take, and highlight competitors that you should be concerned about that you might not have considered before. So we're going to start with brand messaging. So here is a heat map. So just as a reminder, this is how brands are talking about themselves online, web copy, and social. So we've got all the brands plotted down the X and Y axes, and each of these tiles represents one of these comparisons. So we've also got a color chart on the side. Those that are yellow, the yellow shade, are most different to one another, and those that are a blue, darker blue shade are least different to one another. So what stands out to me immediately is that Domino's appears to be most different to all the other brands we've looked at. And from other information that we know about Domino's, it's the one that doesn't have a physical restaurant. So it might be that they might not be able to talk about this dining experience, the interior, the ambiance of a restaurant, whereas the other brands can talk about this. It's also insightful to look at the least different brands. So if you can see along the bottom of the heat map, if we look at Zizzi's moving right, this shows us that they're trying to appeal to everyone's customer base. We can now move into the comparison element of our analysis, because now we know which brands are most and least different, but we don't know why. So for this, we actually found loads of insights, but I'm just going to share with you some of my favorites today. So Pizza Hut is trying to appeal to parents, and they are 16.5 times more likely to mention children than the other brands. Zizzi's is more likely to talk about friends, and Prezzo is 3.4 times more likely to mention the word family. and this sense of family occasion. So what strikes me about this is that Pizza Hut are trying to appeal to parents and mention children, but it's actually Prezzo who are more likely to mention family. We've also got Franco Manca, and they are infinitely more likely to mention sourdough. So this means that sourdough is mentioned by Franco Manca, but not mentioned at all by the other brands. So analysing brand messaging is really only half the story. It's all well and good to know how you talk about yourself as a brand, but it's irrelevant if customers are talking about you differently. It's therefore important to understand brand perception. So here is another heat map, this time looking at brand perception. So this is just a reminder that this is how consumers are talking about the brands online, on social media. So again, what strikes me straight away is that Frankie and Benny's is the most different. So this is highlighted by the yellow tiles. And when we've looked into this further, it's actually because consumers are talking about a large number of stores that are closing down, whereas the other brands have not seen such store closures. Again, it's also insightful to look at the least different. So just as a reminder, these are the really deep, dark blue tiles. So we can see that Prezzo, Zizi, Bella Italia, and Franco Manca are least different. So it's that sense of customers are seeing them as one of the same, they're interchangeable. Oh, Prezzo, Zizi's, they're the same. So again, we moved into the comparison element because this allows us to identify small nuances in language, even when the brands appear to be similar. So what we found for Zizi's is that consumers were infinitely more likely to use the word soggy. So this is really important, as you definitely don't want to be known as the brand that has the soggy pizzas. We've also got Franco Manca, and consumers were infinitely more likely to use the word sourdough. Now, if you can remember from a previous slide, Franco Manca were infinitely more likely to use the word sourdough as well. So they've really solidified their USP, and this is echoed by their consumers. So finally, it's interesting to have a look at the two heat maps that we've already seen side by side. So brand messaging and brand perception. And I just want to point out Domino's and Pizza Hut. So from the brand messaging point of view, Pizza Hut and Domino's are actually the most different. They're this yellow tile in the middle. Whereas when we look at brand perception, Pizza Hut and Domino's are actually the least different. So customers are seeing them as one of the same. So it's just interesting because although they're trying to differentiate themselves in the market, you can do this all you like, but if consumers see you as the same, then you're really going to miss the mark. So in summary, it's all well and good to know thy enemy, but it's actually more interesting to know thy enemy's customer. So we're now going to move to our keynote speaker, who is Gideon Wilkins. So Gideon is head of research at McCann Central, and he's going to be talking about today how, as an agency, they were able to differentiate themselves from their competitors.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate the invite today. The intention of these few slides I'm going to share with you today is about understanding competitors within our industry. We do a lot of work, obviously, similar to what's been shared on pizzas. We work across a whole range of categories and studies to help our clients understand themselves versus competitors. But this case study is actually about us as a research team understanding our methodologies versus others in the industry. So on the next slide, there's kind of a couple of reminders about the challenges of research. This is an image that some of you will know from the old TV show Mad Men. And one of the challenges of research, and particularly in my industry, when I chat to creatives about research, this is what they think of. They think of old-fashioned traditional research, where either you're kind of hand-picking participants that sit in a room and talk out of context and out of reality, or on the next slide, research sometimes feel a little bit boring. I don't know whether any of you have been sat in a survey and you think you've been in it for hours and hours, and suddenly you're told you've only kind of done 17% and you've got another 100 questions to go. There's this assumption that you do qual if you want to go into depth, quant if you want to do scale. And on the next slide, one of the things that is a real advantage of being within an advertising agency is, although I am a true blue researcher, I absolutely love nerding out about statistical significant differences and all of those kind of things that we researchers love to do. I'm also able to talk to people in other departments. So I'm good friends with the head of live, the head of paid social. I can chat regularly with the PR team or the above and below the line advertising team. And the reality is, within advertising worlds, the channels for reaching us as consumers is getting more and more real and more engaged on one-to-one basis. And so we wanted to test whether we could do a research methodology that followed that same trend and got to more authentic conversations. One of the great things that has been illustrated in the previous presentation about the rise of ambient data or kind of social consumer generated data is it can be really authentic and genuine, getting to see whether a pizza has got a soggy base and that kind of thing. What we wanted to test is whether we could replicate some of those real life conversations, but in a way that was rigorous. And then the other challenge is that it's great to be able to go and listen on social to existing conversations about your brand. But what if you've got new concepts and new ideas? You can't use social data to get people to give feedback on a new campaign idea, but you might still want to be able to gather some more engaging and connected data sources. So next slide, please. The approach that we took was, can we prove that the way we're doing things is more than just ad agency fluff? One of the things that as a researcher in an ad agency, I'm aware that sometimes there's a little bit of a raised eyebrow to go, is it just ad agencies kind of smoke and mirrors? And so, because my background, I come from a 15, maybe even more than that, approaching 20 years in the research industry. I've done lots of research on research projects, and this is about comparing our methodology against competitors. So next slide, please. We did this in collaboration with some master's students at the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. There is a master's study that is being published at the moment around this same project. So we kind of went down the route of doing this properly, with rigor, with authenticity. So next slide, please. One of the things that we did, and you might actually need to, it doesn't look like the one on the right is, if you can just click on the video on the right, well, there it goes, it's up and running. So we were testing two different things. Within any research, you need to have a variable, things that you're changing and comparing between two elements, and then you need to have some things that you keep constant. What we were testing was, what if we went and took a traditional concept testing survey like Zappy? Zappy store I use Zappy. Zappy has its place. It's quick, it's fast. You can get answers in a few hours sometimes. But we wanted to see whether projects like Zappy or the Kantar link or the Ipsos equivalent, could we get to a richer, more natural set of feedback in the text and the conversation? So the things that we changed when we were doing two things side by side, we ran a parallel project of the Zappy survey against a more Facebook Messenger chatbot survey. The sample for the one on the left was using Online Panel, the leading panel provider of Dynata, so we passed Dynata sample through this, versus collecting people within a live social environment, and the incentive that we used was slightly different. Online Panels use kind of the points and paid incentives. We were running a prize draw for people to talk. So those were the variables that we were looking at. And the one on the left, the Zappy traditional quant, using things like a quant survey, Dynata sampling, paid incentives, that is what we would call the industry standard. That's what we're competing against, and what a lot of people, some of you on the call, are probably using to do your early stage concept testing. And then we were looking at, would it be more engaging, richer, more quality data if we chatted to people via a chatbot methodology in Messenger and recruited people into a live environment rather than panel sample. On the next slide, I can show you the research rigor, the constants we kept the same. It was the exact same stimulus going through both studies. Many of the open questions were worded exactly the same to remove some of the survey design bias. These were both fixed scripted surveys. There was no human moderator. They were both quant sample sizes of 150 people or more. So this was effectively quantitative research in our competitor approach, which is ZAPI representing traditional quant, versus a quant sample within a chatbot messenger environment. So what did we find? Next slide. The thing that we were looking at, the question and the brief for this objective, that what we're aiming to look at as a methodology is all about early stage concept testing. We wanted to know, is it possible to get to a richer understanding of their feedback on campaigns and their feedback on concepts before we go into actually doing full shoots and filming? Obviously, for an ad agency and for a client, the cost of going out and producing a full ad can run into tens and hundreds of thousands. So this was about understanding whether we could have a quicker, simpler, but richer way of doing early stage testing without the slowness and sometimes kind of artificial environment of a focus group, people in a room, but also without what we felt was some of the kind of more transactional data that came out of quantitative. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what we found. If you just click again to show the data. So the first relatively simple piece of data that came out of it was when people went through the exact same concept and the exact same question, what did you like about this campaign idea? If we engage them in conversational environments, the number of words used on average doubled. So they used full rich sentences rather than quite staccato forward sentences are things like, I like the color, the car was nice, the product is good. An 8-word sentence is a full richer sentence. And actually many people run up into 10 or 15 words. Now, anyone can count the number of words in a sentence, and where Relative Insights allowed us to very quickly and rapidly compare the two methodologies was about putting those two full text data sources into Relative Insights to look at whether does having longer sentences and more engaged, more communicative respondents, does that lead to them actually giving us more interesting, useful data, particularly bearing in mind the research question was, will this methodology help us in that pre-production stage to get a more co-creative set of feedback compared to if it was put through some of those quite trendy and popular and growing in popularity, these rapid kind of dashboard yes/no methodologies. So next slide, I can talk you through some of the differences. And if you just tap again to show the differences. So one of the things that I find really useful with Relative Insights for a comparison between the two different approaches is how quickly that it can give you a statistical difference. And we saw at the beginning some of those differences highlighted in the heat map. What we found as we went through all of the topics that the messenger approach was more likely to do, it was significantly more likely to generate topics and themes within those sentences that were co-creative. And that's really, really useful for an ad agency or for a creative team or a client before they go into production. We're not testing a final ad to say, should it go on air, yes or no? Or sometimes one of the good things about like a Zappy store or a link is if you've got an ad from the global team and an ad from the local team, and it's a straight shootout and you need to go, which of these two ads goes on air tomorrow, that's fine. You want something to help decision-making. When you're in pre-production and you need robust big data still to make decisions, what you actually need is people being co-creative. And what we found was that people were 7 times more likely to use co-creative language. And by co-creative, we mean that they were engaging, giving feedback on the mood and tone, the creative style, what they liked, what they felt could be improved, what grabbed their attention, what caught their eye. And sharing this with a creative team and with a client at this early stage allows them to go, oh, brilliant. Actually, for this particular methodology, we can tweak this, we can improve the colors, we can address the script. So by putting the concepts into this co-creative platform, we can now prove that it's 7 times more likely than our competitor, a company like Zappy and some of the other online quant platforms. It's 7 times more likely to be co-creative. What's more than that, on the next slide, is about the whether it's transactional. So the conversational environment, online messenger platforms, are 5 times less likely to be transactional stop-go language. Now, as I said earlier, if you're at a point where you're simply making a decision between A or B, you're not looking to optimize, you're not looking to develop further, you just really need to say, of these 3 or 4 options, which one should I progress? A stop-go language can be useful. When you're earlier in the process, it's not useful at all. The reality of early stage concepts is usually they're not fully fleshed out. You're not necessarily looking to have people say, I hate it, stop, or I don't like it, stop. What we found was that the traditional quant surveys represented by Zappi, but indicative of most other quant studies, because the way that Zappi tends to work is that they offer a rapid turnaround of something similar to a lot of the other quant studies. That type of study, that very kind of quick and transactional survey design, is 5 times more likely than a conversational online messenger platform to use language around product, buying, advertising, or kind of quite a more negative. I didn't like it, I didn't understand it, it was confusing, I don't get it, scrap this idea, ditch it, move on. As I say, if the point you're at in the process is about a stop-go decision making, then it's fine to go with that approach. In reality, if you just move to the next slide for a final thought, using this methodology of co-creative approaching, using messenger, using kind of conversational quant, means that firstly it's faster than going down the traditional route of qual. Traditionally, qual focus groups can take anything from 6 to 8 weeks for screening, recruitment, running them, and then delivering them. So we're able to have this conversational kind of social recreation in a faster timeline. The next data point is that, as I said, they are 2 times more engaging. People share 2 times more content compared to traditional quant open text questions. And then the final point was when we ran this for the client, we were able to help them get to a point where that they were improving over time, because we were doing that early stage co-creation element. It was 2 times more engaging and 2 times more impactful. So that was my flying through whistle stop tour. I think I've done about 13 minutes there. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I can hand back to the Relative Insights team.
Perfect. Thank you, Gideon. We're now going to be moving on to today's panel. So Ben from Superunion and Felicity from Relative Insight, but formerly at Ipsos, are here in the room with us today. We've also got Peter, who is BP Client Services at Harte Hanks, and he joins us online. So most of us have a good idea about who our competitors are. We know why we think they are different to us and why we think we are better than them. But do we really know what our customers think and how our audience differentiates us? So this is what we're going to be talking about today in the panel. So we're just going to start off with a broad question in terms of, so what are the easiest mistakes to make when it comes to initial and traditional white space analysis? So I don't know whether, Ben, you'd like to start us off today?
Yeah, I can give my 2 cents worth. I think, so I'm a brand strategist, so at Superunion, and we work on all clients from all sectors, largely in the kind of like B2B space as well. I think more and more, some of the like initial errors is where you actually look to find that white space. So if you go with a hypothesis, I think some people look really close to that same competitive set. So say, for example, I'm looking, you know, to find a white space for a new airline or an airline which wants to rebrand. I think it would be an error to look at like, well, what are the other airlines in my exact sector doing? I think that the real opportunity is to look at what are the kind of aspirational hero kind of brands, so to speak, in different sectors. What are they and what can we learn from them? And that's why with, I guess with tools which analyze data in a way that Relative Insight does, it's really useful because it helps you normalize the insight. So for example, I could be, I'll give you an example of, I was working on a very sexy concrete company. And we were speaking with the CEO, and they wanted to reposition because the sector is really, it's a really dirty sector. You know, it's very highly emitting, and there's lots of supply chain issues. And the CEO said, I want to change the image of what we do. We've got a really good strategic plan, but we want to kind of elevate our brand to kind of tell that story. I said, okay, so, which brands do you look towards do you find? He said, I really want to be like Tesla. And it was like, okay, that's really interesting, because that's nothing to do with you. That's nothing to do with your sector. It's not one of your competitors at all, but it's like, I really, really want to do that. And when we did, we did the audit and the analysis of Tesla, there's very little on a kind of superficial level that you can kind of take to say, well, hello, Mr. Concrete, this is what we've learned from Tesla. But by scratching below the surface a little bit, and words were a really good way to actually look at the anatomy of how Tesla articulate their strategy or their activations, we were able to take some really kind of valuable insights. And so the thing that I've learned from that project is, I know I've rambled, but it's like where you find that white space is like, I think the absolute #1 point. It was like, if you go too close to the company, you'll only be the best of a small group, rather than creating and elevating yourself into that category of one.
Flick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I'm coming at it, so I'm part of a relative family now, but I'm coming at it from a kind of Ipsos perspective. So I spent 6 years there, so from an agency background, and then also spent a bit of time in R&D. So kind of was having to come up with innovative projects and stuff directly myself. So I think the biggest problem that we kind of set ourselves was actually thinking too big, and we put a lot of pressure on. And I think the expectation of whitespace is that it's very blue sky thinking, and you're coming up with these crazy ideas, but actually the biggest challenge with that is that kind of financially you might not be able to do it if the technology doesn't exist. So actually I think the first step that we need to make is to kind of define your boundaries. So it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but you almost do need to put some limits on whitespace thinking, because actually our brains are kind of programmed to work better if we have a few constraints on it. So kind of the way that we tend to do that is you start to think about, okay, well, what are your core brand competencies? So what are the things that we are best known for? And actually you probably don't want to do whitespace in there because you're going to cannibalize your own products. But if you take a step out, then you think about adjacent categories. So for example, if you're a VMS, so vitamins, minerals and supplements, if you are in that space, do you potentially want to move into baby milk? Do you want to move into sports drinks? And actually you do have to decide that, but one of the ways that we can do that is actually if you take a load of data, hopefully text data about these kind of adjacent categories, and put it through something like the heat maps, actually you can then start to say, okay, well, how much is VMS being already talked about in baby milk, or how much is being talked about in sports drinks? And actually, if it's very cluttered, you don't want to play there because it's cluttered already. So yeah, defining your boundaries by kind of looking at what's already happening in the market.
I'd love to get your thoughts as well, Peter.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. As much as it's a beautiful day in Dallas, Texas, I must admit I'd rather be with you in the UK this afternoon. For those of you that don't know Harte Hanks, we're a global customer experience company. We support customer journeys ranging from acquisition all the way through customer care, retention, loyalty, and repeat purchases. And we have 3 divisions. We have a traditional agency side, we have customer care, and we have fulfillment. I happen to be the head of our client services and our customer care. So I'm looking at this a little bit differently. I'm looking at it from a post-purchase perspective. I think a lot of times when we work with our brands and opportunities for them to grow and retain their customers, attract new customers and retain customers, the biggest mistake I see is the brands are too willing to make assumptions. They make assumptions of how they're perceived in the marketplace. They make assumptions about where their competitors are. Our encouragement to them is not just to look at the competitive set through fact-based data, but also to look at other companies who are either potentially entering the competitive set that they have, or they may be adjacent to that set and open up the boundaries so that they can truly do white space analysis.
Perfect, thank you. So as we saw earlier from some of the work around pizzas, in a crowded marketplace, products are sometimes perceived to be similar by consumers. So how do you think a brand should differentiate themselves?
I'll do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess my perspective is not news, and I think a lot of brands are quite good at doing this already, but it's always good to go back to the kind of foundations, and it's that we need to be thinking from a functional and emotional perspective. So think about your consumers, your customers. Functional, yes, we always start with the functional needs, but actually what emotional needs are you layering up to? And I think especially in the last 2 years, we as consumers are much more driven by kind of emotional content, and we prioritize the emotional benefits a lot more, I think, than we ever have done. And yeah, as a brand, you've got to tap into that. So kind of one example we always use is if you think about a sharing bucket of kind of mini rolls, I might pop out and buy one from the supermarket and bring it back to the office. Functional benefit, I can give it to lots of people. It's a cost efficient way of bringing treats. Emotional benefit actually for me is that it's these moments of joy that it's bringing. So whenever I'm diving into that bucket, and it's creating this little shared moment, that is where your marketing and your comms should be tapping into, and that's where you really differentiate. Can my brand bring these moments of joy? Or another example might be kind of, I buy a camera phone, it's got the best camera on the market, and I want to do that because it's going to give me amazing photos. Functional, tick. But actually, for me, I actually get an emotional kind of kick out of that, because I know that I don't have to then go and buy a separate camera. I've kind of got it all in one. So for me, that's an emotional driver, because I've kind of been efficient with my money. So yeah, it's about layering up. And I think brands, as I said, brands are doing that, but it's just making sure that your comms and your marketing's hitting that point.
Do you have something to add, Ben?
Yeah, I can say our kind of perspective, which is very similar to that, in the sense that from a brand building perspective, if there are kind of like 3 main blocks to a brand, one is like the context. So it's like, what's that environment that you're operating in? So what are the macro trends? What are the societal shifts that you're kind of working towards? And then on the other side, you have your target. So who are the audiences? Then the bit in the middle is kind of where the brand sits, and that's the role of the brand. And in this space, it's like, in a very commoditized space, it's almost better to take a step back and actually say, what's my tribe? Because everyone might be coming to Zizi to eat pizza, but within that, people have gone through different need states. And we saw through your analysis, right, that people are coming in to celebrate, people are coming in for a family outing. And then if you double click on the need states, then you can actually untap a slightly different kind of audience set in each of those. And then you can nuance your product and service to those, because everyone's eating the same pizza, fine, but there may be, different requirements early on. So if you're coming to a family, they may need advanced planning. So an easy platform to reserve your table online, or they may be coming with young kids. So, you can change the cutlery that you give them. So you can always find areas to differentiate your brand, but the way you can really get ahead is by building a brand around one core idea. And that is where you can kind of find your tribe and build out from there. And I think that's how you can get a differentiated customer experience, even in a very commoditized space.
Great. Peter, I've actually got a question for you now. So this is, how do you encourage people to care about your brand after they've bought a product or a service?
This is really the core of what Harte Hanks customer care does, is we look at that, how the transition between the acquisition all the way through the customer care. So we found that our best-in-class customers map out a customer journey with just the same amount of rigor and discipline as they do through acquisition. So they're using data and they're using insights and feedback after the sale to drive loyalty and repeat purchases. How is it done? It's done by first anticipating the needs of the customer after the purchase. So I'll give you an example. One of our clients is a global appliance manufacturer. So if you think about that journey, they've acquired the product and they're taking it home. It's either being installed or they are installing it. So by creating this very hyper-personalized experience from out of the box, through education, through usage, and ultimately through advocacy, is the way to kind of really differentiate yourself after the sale. And each one of those stops requires a level of hyper-personalization and often omni-channel. It's one thing to get a thank you right after you make a purchase that said thank you for the purchase. It's another to anticipate the needs. What is the need on delivery, on unboxing, on setup, and then anticipate any education or usage that they might require to deploy the product.
So you've touched a bit there on brand loyalty, but how do you turn a customer into a brand advocate?
Are you asking me that again, Jessica?
Yeah, if that's okay.
You know, the advocacy is a huge part of what we do as well, is not just to create that loyalty factor, but to create somebody that's so excited about the purchase of the product that they're willing to tell friends. And oftentimes that's through social media. So we look out at, again, we've had opportunities to work with Relative Insights, looking at matching that brand voice to what the customer is saying and behaving, to how we're representing it in terms of post-acquisition customer care. We do things like invite them into advocacy panels or advisory panels, even in some cases, to really bring them into the brand family itself. At the end of the day, though, it's all about the data and it's all about the personalization, talking to our customers from a first-person perspective. We've all had opportunities where we've been bombarded after the sale with acquisition offers, and you really have to question whether or not that brand or that company even cares about you if they didn't even recognize that you purchased the product in the first place.
And I guess building on that, it's a slightly different angle, but thinking about reviews and the fact, I think I read an article recently and it was about 30% of customers don't trust employees of the brand that they're buying from. But 90% of people before they purchase something will look at reviews. So actually, if you can get your customers after they've purchased to get on there and write a review, so you ping them an email and say, actually, how are you finding it? And get them to give a positive, hopefully, review, then actually that's going to go a long way. And again, I guess as a brand, it's a bit of a segue here, but I think a lot of people, especially in UX, spend a lot of money in thinking about the kind of the checkout process on your website. So how easy is it for me to put something in my basket, put the payment in, check out? Actually, if we funnel a bit more money into making reviews more easier to access and easier to read, then that could go potentially a long way. And then hopefully you can take them out and analyze them and learn from them. So, yeah.
Ben, do you have any thoughts on kind of the review side of things?
Not so much the review thing, but on the advocacy thing is quite interesting, because we've had like a flurry of briefs lately with brands asking us to return them to love brand status, so like a badge brand icon, which is quite interesting, because it is all about this kind of loyalty and kind of unwavering loyalty. And it comes back to this thing, which I think that Relative Insight is also really good at, it's just like absolutely nailing your tribe and understanding like your people. And because everyone operates in the same context, so you know, if you're having mini roles, everyone's like operating in the same mini role market, but actually being able to like absolutely understand the so what, and using your brand to do the so what of your particular segment, that they actively choose to engage with your product rather than the others. I think that kind of more upstream strategic approach of like identifying your small space to play, elevating yourself into that kind of category of one, it's like the clear way to kind of, in a sustainable manner, build that loyalty.
Peter, I know when we spoke previously as well, you mentioned this kind of that idea of consumer review data. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I do. A big part of our customer care practice is social care. So it's looking carefully at what the attitudes are of consumers online and how they're sharing those. We respond to many, if not all, of our clients' social posts, both the good, the bad, and the ugly with it. We're celebrating the positive reviews, the 5-star reviews. We're acknowledging the lower reviews and experience. Oftentimes we're taking people offline to consumers offline to see if we can't resolve the issue itself. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is to leave them with a feeling that as a brand or as a company, we care about the customer experience and we're committed to making it better.
I actually did a piece of work back in Ipsos days where we were looking at kind of digital first versus high street banks and the way that they interact with their customers. And it was so kind of, you looked at their social channels and even the way in which they responded to reviews on kind of Trustpilot and stuff. And actually these digital first brands were very much going peer-to-peer, getting them involved in new product development, new features, everything like that. So it was very much a kind of back and forth conversation, whereas with the high street banks, for better or worse, it was a bit more kind of functional conversations going on. So I completely agree. It is about that, how you're interacting post-sale with the social channels and interviews, definitely.
Just touching on what you've just mentioned there, do you think it's kind of more about stealing customers, or do you think there's a space to share customers in the marketplace?
Yeah, so actually that research, because from a personal perspective, I think that you don't necessarily, we're so stealing customers and increasing your kind of share of market, but actually it doesn't have to be binary. You don't always pick kind of one brand over the other, and that's it. And high street banks versus digital brands. So I have my current account, my savings with a high street bank, and that's great because it's kind of trusted and reliable, and I know I can go in store. But I also have a Monzo account, and I use that for when I travel, and I use that for kind of my shared accounts, and that's fine. And I love having both, and I don't kind of value one over the other. So I don't think it's necessarily kind of we need to take these customers. It's very much about kind of sharing, but being those brands to be very clear on this is what we do well and kind of sticking to that.
And then Ben, I've got one final question for you, if that's okay. So in the world of big data, how do you go about spotting opportunities that are hidden in plain sight?
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. And because to the earlier point that we were talking about at McCann, like clients often come to us and they say, oh, we want to do this project, we want to like kind of reposition or rebrand, or we need this new strategy. But before we do that, we need like extensive market research. We need to understand what these people are, what they're saying, and what they're doing. And things with traditional market research, no offense to Ipsos, but it's very expensive and very long. It takes a really long time, and actually it does suffer quite a lot from a lot of confirmation bias, because you go in with a very specific thing, especially if you commission it yourself. You go in looking for a specific thing, and then you almost go and find that can prove your hypothesis or not. Whereas there is so much, we live in such a metrosized society now, so like you can measure anything, and it's just about kind of what you do with that. So like, for example, WPP just launched this partnership with Snapchat, where it looks at the different trends of what people put on their open stories, and the kind of conversations that they're having. So you can do the, it's about how you take different inputs or different kind of free data, like Google Trends, for example, and how you aggregate them together to say, okay, that's interesting. People are talking about this on Snapchat, but search over the last 3 months has been about this. And you can kind of build up a consumer world or build up a landscape just using these kind of different methods. And it's something that we've been doing more and more, and we want to lean into more and more, because I just feel that it gives you, you're more likely to get that unexpected aha moment, you know, when you're looking just at the macro market. But that's where I think you can get the real like kind of hidden insight, hidden in plain sight.
Thank you. And then Peter, before we just move on to the Q&A, I've just got one more question for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So how far do you agree that solving a problem or averting a crisis is more advantageous than having no problem in the first place?
You know, it almost feels like that's a rhetorical question, because of course we should try to resolve any issues and anticipate issues ahead of time, Jessica. I think that when somebody purchases a product, you have a certain amount of goodwill, you have a certain amount of capital to engage that customer with prior to any issues that arise. There's a lot of temptation these days to spend all of your marketing dollars and your investment in customer experience on the front end and not necessarily on the back end. And as I've said before, I think that the best-in-class companies spend as much rigor understanding what happens after there's a purchase, and they begin to anticipate that and the needs before they actually emerge as a problem itself. Different examples of that is the way that companies now are educating us on usage, whether or not it's through YouTube, it's through peer-to-peer chats or forums that are together. A lot of folks are starting to recognize that the post-purchase experience is just as important as the pre-purchase experience, and they're spending more investment and time to design ones that not only encourage a satisfied customer, but actually amplify their voice and to become advocates. So thanks for that question.
So that's all we have time for today's panel before we move on to question and answers. But I just want to say a massive thank you to all our speakers today for joining us. So we've had some questions through, so I'll send them. So I know you've kind of touched on this, but how can brand managers better address their consumers' needs?
So I guess it goes back to that functional and emotional, and making sure that we are kind of layering up to that and not thinking about it purely from a kind of what are they seeing kind of on tin. I guess the other way, in terms of identifying those needs in the first place, you can think about it from a data perspective. So yes, we've got reviews, forums are great at getting to kind of deep-rooted needs. Search data, I think you mentioned. I'm a big fan of search data, so actually I kind of nerd out sometimes and look at what the top Google searches are. The data, I think it's really good at kind of seeing what people are interested in. So from a data perspective, you've got all these amazing sources online, and then from an analysis perspective, use a framework. I really would advocate using a framework of some sort. So you've got, I know a lot of agencies use them, kind of, you've got various motivational frameworks. It's about what is driving people to certain behaviors. There's some kind of industry-wide established ones. So the Shorts model is this cultural framework. And if you apply data on top of these, you've kind of got and actually they can be really useful tools in kind of deconstructing some of the data and finding a bit of meaning in it. So for example, I guess if you're talking about, for another food example, like a chocolate digestive, so if you're saying, okay, as McVitie's, I think they're in it still, where do we sit? Is chocolate digestives perceived as a very kind of traditional brand, so traditional British, or actually are we, because I'm covered in chocolate, much more in the kind of hedonistic, delicious treat space? And using a framework to kind of split out these differences can be really helpful in understanding where you fit currently, and then where you can go.
Great, thank you. I'm now going to open for questions in the room. If anyone's got any questions for any of our speakers today. Go.
So can Gideon go into the results of his experiment? So I think his third stat said it was 2 times more effective. So I was wondering if Gideon can come on and sort of expand on that a little bit more.
Oh, I think has Gideon left?
Okay.
Sorry, I hadn't realised, yeah.
I'll get him another time.
Has anyone else got any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, on the data that was presented with the pizza investigation, there was stats like Pizza Hut at 6.5 times more likely to mention family, children, was it? Is that data like weighted to take into account the brand's reach, their frequency of posting, or the amount of content that they put out there?
So it's based on relative difference. So it's how it is taken into effect, kind of the frequency of it compared to all the other data sets. And I think it was on the word that we looked at that for. Has anyone else got any other questions? Yeah.
Just coming back to the pizza exercise. Does the reality confirms the concept that there are more children turning up in one area, more families in the other one? So it is great what is the language, but whether does it make any difference when people turn up?
We didn't look into the brands in loads of detail in terms of what the reality was. It was more how they used their language online to kind of differentiate themselves in the market. So I'm not too sure in terms of when they're actually in store. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah.
I got loads. So for Peter at Harte Hanks, how to really, first of all, realize they have this post-purchase data that they can use, not just from a sort of CX efficiency point of view, but in terms of actually improving their offer and their appeal to consumers, consumer analytic phase.
Is that for Peter?
That's for Peter.
Yeah.
I think we heard it back from here. But...
There was a little bit of background noise. Could you just repeat the last part of the question?
Sorry, hi. How frequently do customers actually understand that they can use the CX data, which most brands have got loads and loads of? How many of them even understand that they could apply that to their marketing and consumer analytic world?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. Again, I think companies have been slow to do that simply because they're so siloed organizationally that you have your folks on the marketing and sales side, and then you've got your folks on the customer care or support side. And oftentimes those two roads don't intersect, or too often they don't intersect. What we're finding out though is by being a good partner to the sales and marketing side, customer care can bring that data back in a way that truly does provide insights back to the marketers, back to the folks that are positioning and communicating in the marketplace. We're doing that a couple of different ways. One of them is, with so many restrictions on data and data privacy, we're encouraging our customers to take that moment when they're interacting with their customer and gather first-party data. It may or may not even be relative or relevant to the particular conversation they're having. But if I'm engaging with the consumer, if I'm a travel company, I'm engaging with a consumer over maybe a concern or a problem, what else can I ask that customer at the time to build up some institutional knowledge about their behavior in a first-party data perspective? And then how do I bring that back into the voice of the brand? And those are the kinds of things that we're doing. And quite honestly, that's why we've enjoyed working with Relative Insights, because we're looking at attitude, we're looking at behavior, and we're looking at language and trying to bring that both back from both the customer care side, but also on the front end of the acquisition. So thanks for asking that. Love that question.
Thank you. I've got a question from online now. So to all the people on the panel, what's the most surprising thing you found about your competitors?
Don't be prepared to talk about it.
I would just state a couple of things. One of never underestimate your competitors. During the past 2 years, folks have had to really expand their thinking. Those that haven't expanded their thinking have kind of fallen by the wayside. I'd say the most surprising thing I've found out about competitors is maybe their lack of willingness to stretch and to expand their horizon into more of a full customer experience, a customer journey, and staying very closely to their swim lane, which is just customer care. How quickly can we resolve the issue and move on? And I would say that's a little surprising to me on more of a global sense.
think my biggest thing is not to underestimate how complex their internal infrastructure is, and therefore how long it takes decisions and funding and everything to be made internally, because you think just because it works one way in your company, God knows does it work that way in another company. It can take ages. So just to be aware of that and to be aware of the kind of pressures on individual people that you might be working with, because it's not always, it's rarely straightforward.
I think my thing is, when you do like competitor benchmarking or competitor analysis, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt, because you kind of don't know what their long-term strategy is. And there's been various times where you do some market research and you kind of set up all your competitors and you think you come up with a really kind of nuanced understanding of the marketplace. Then one competitor like goes off and does something completely different, and then all of their kind of like outlying language or outlying kind of strategy like all of a sudden makes sense. So yeah, this only comes up because I was working on a broadcaster, and all the quite interesting space now to analysis, because they're all the kind of around the world, the traditional national broadcasters are trying to redefine their role with all the kind of like SVOD, like Netflix and Prime and everything. And it's just a really, really volatile space. And one funny thing was when there was the whole thing around like Netflix and chill, it's just having a look at some really awful national broadcaster responses of their own take on like Netflix and chill. And it was just very, very, very surprising and quite unfortunate.
I've got another question online for the panel as well. So do you think that competitor analysis is strongest or weakest in any certain sectors? So healthcare, for example.
I think healthcare just naturally can be challenging just because of the data available, because you've got so many, like a lot, getting hold of HCP, like healthcare professional data is always a challenge. And also generally, if we're looking kind of, especially in the world of social data, people don't tend to talk about kind of the health problems, especially kind of the embarrassing ones online. So yeah, healthcare can generally be quite hard, and therefore it's a bit kind of behind the balls what everyone's doing. I would say FMCG and CPG tend to be quite good at it, just because there's so much data about it and people are willing to speak about it.
But there is also the thing though that whenever there's a kind of like a consumer experience, as in like a normal person interacting with the brand, like the negative experiences are always louder than the kind of positive experiences. So some sectors where, especially in like travel and hospitality, it is quite hard to do like social listening and social research, because it spikes every time there's a problem, and it looks like you have like all these different kind of like market trends, but they're very you only really see the outliers, and it's very hard to actually scratch the under the surface and say what is the kind of business as usual perception of those brands.
Okay, thank you. So that's all actually we have time for today. So thank you so much for joining us in the room and online. If you would like to find out more about the case study that I discussed at the start, please feel free to scan the QR code. It's on the leaflets that are on your chair as well. But yeah, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.